Hello, Hebrew fans. Today we are moving into our second stem. We have so far been talking about the call. We've talked about the call perfect. We've talked about the call imperfect. We've talked about the call volitionals, like jussives and cohortatives and imperatives. We've talked about the call vav consecutive, or the call vayatol, another name that it goes by, right? We are now leaving the call behind. Now remember, call just meant unencumbered, nothing added to it, kind of light. That meant that the root that you chose for your verb, or that someone else chose for their verb, if you find it in the call, then that means that there's no extra meaning added to that root. So the root amar, to say, the call of amar means like to say. The call of the verb asa, to work or do, to make or do or work, that would mean to work or make or do. Or, for example, the verb kara, to call out loud or call out, or to read out loud, in fact, is another way to render that root. In the call, that means exactly what you think it means. That is to say, it means the basic root meaning of that root. Now, we're going to move into a different stem. There's all sorts of stems. We'll see a map in just a moment in Hebrew. And so we're going to learn one by one what these additional stems mean. Now, what a stem means is that you add something on top of the root. You add something kind of physical to it. That is, you add another sound or letter to the root, and that creates a new additional meaning that gets added. So the Niphal is what we're going to look at today. And guess what you add for the Niphal? You add that first letter there, a nun. You add a nun to your verbs, and it gives it a passive or reflexive meaning. Now, I'll get to what that means in just a moment, but that's the basic idea of what we're going to talk about today. So here is our little chart. Think of it like a house, right? You know, you got the call in the middle, and then the Niphal and the PL on either side. These are other stems that we haven't gotten to yet, but we will. And on the top, there's the Hitpael, which is one of the strangest of all. And then underneath, you have the Hofal, the Niphal, and the Pual. Okay, so let me just explain this very basically. The call, we've already learned, and that is just our basic meaning for verbs. The Niphal and the PL, we'll get to in a little bit, but both of them have something to do with kind of adding a meaning that has to do with making something or making something into something. We'll, again, deal with the particular areas of that later. But then Hofal, Niphal, and Pual are all reflexive or passive stems. So remember when we talked about active or passive verbs? So active is like, I opened the door. A passive would be, the door was opened. I don't know who the subject of the verb is, who did the action, so I just say the door was opened. That's a passive verb. A reflexive means I do it to myself, like I dressed myself today, or I was talking to myself. That's a reflexive verb, something you do to yourself. The Hofal, the Niphal, and the Pual are reflexive or passive, and they can mean either or both verbal stems. So the Niphal is the passive of the call. It just means the basic meaning of the root, but with this additional meaning of it was done, or I did it to myself, or you did it to yourself, etc. Just to show you on our chart of Hebrew verb stems, where we're looking on what we're looking at the call. First of all, that big chunk over here. This is the call. 70% of verbs are in the call. You've already learned 70% of verbs in the Bible. That's pretty awesome. But then over here is the Niphal. So about 5.6%. Let's round that up. Let's say 6% of verbs in the Bible you're going to learn about today. So it's a lot less than the call, but they still are very common. If you think about it, if in 10 verses in the Bible, you've got 2 or 3 verbs per verse, you got 30 verbs in 10 verses of the Bible. Let's say like one chapter of the book of Ruth or something. You've got a few of those verbs are going to be Niphals. So you're going to have some every chapter of the Bible that you translate. And remember, we talked about stems. Stems usually add a meaning to the root. Call means nothing extra added. And we will talk about the PL. This is just to give you another kind of a possible root meaning here. The PL is another root. We'll get to this later. Don't worry about this right now. But just to say, it kind of adds this factative or intensive meaning. It adds, like, if someone becomes a priest, you put that in the PL, to become a priest. to get like inaugurated as a priest. This is put in the PL stem. So all to say that these stems can add these kind of interesting extra meanings. And we'll talk about the Niphal in just a moment. So remember the perfect. We've got stems like call and now Niphal, right? So if I ask you to parse a verb, I'll say the first comes the stem. So you'll say call or Niphal. Now those are the two that you will know after this video. But then we'll also then go to aspect. So you'd say call perfect or call imperfect, or Niphal perfect or Niphal imperfect. We're going to start with the perfect, right? Which means that past tense in English, right? Completed action is what it really means in Hebrew. And remember, the perfect is a verbal form where we add endings or suffixes or suffomatives, right? A formative here on the chart just means either a prefix or a suffix, or a preformative or a sufformative. But so these endings that you get for the perfect, the zipa, tata, ti, utem, tenu, those are the same for the Niphal, and they're going to be the same for all these stems. Guess what? We're going to learn the PL, the PL perfect. We're going to learn the Niphal perfect. We're going to learn the Hifal perfect. Yeah, we're going to learn all these, and they all have perfects, they all have imperfects, and so on. And they're going to have the same affirmatives. That is, sufformatives and preformatives and stuff. They're going to have all those same endings and beginnings that you saw in the call, which is great. You've already learned that. They're just going to have this little extra thing that tells you that it's like, say, Niphal perfect. So here is that extra thing that gives you the Niphal perfect. Our root here is katal, which is that paradigmatic root, that just kind of basic root, which means to kill, unfortunately, but it's just so strong. It shows up in all these different forms in very clear ways in the Bible. So katal here is our root, and then we're going to say this is the Niphal perfect. So you can see those endings. You can see your root katal, and then you can see zipa, tata, ti, utem, tenu endings, same as the call perfect. You've already learned that, and that is great. There's an extra marker here though, and can you see it? It is, boom, a prefixed noon. It's actually not just a noon, right? It's a ne that gets added to it. If you see Monty Python, the knights who say ni, this is their favorite verb stem in Hebrew. But so you see these noons here and a hirek underneath it, and that is a marker of the Niphal perfect. So Niphal really is just adding like an extra letter, this noon, to the front of your roots. So what does it mean when you have verbs in the Niphal, say Niphal perfect, right? What is this extra meaning that's added? As I said, it's reflexive, like he saw himself, or I dressed myself, or you ordered your own, or you cooked your own meal, or something like that. You fed yourself, right? Those are all reflexive meanings of verbs. Or the passive is another possible meaning of the Niphal as a stem. Like she was seen, the door was opened, the roof was blown off, in a storm or something like that. I mean, what is the active agent in a storm? I guess it's the storm, but what is a storm? It's a bunch of wind, and it's not a thing exactly, really. So in any event, when you have a complicated subject like that, sometimes we put things in the passive voice, or when we don't know who the active subject was, the paper was was placed on the table, right? Who put it there? So in any event, another possible meaning is reciprocal. This is kind of like reflexive. This is basically reflexive. If you think about reflexive being a group of people doing something back and forth to one another, so a bunch of people are talking to each other, sometimes that's in the Niphal, because it's sort of reflexive. Like when a group of people are looking at one another, or they see one another, right? So our subject is really a bunch of people doing an active thing all at once, but they're doing it within that group of people. Or sometimes in the Niphal, like they fought with one another. That will be in the Niphal. That's a reciprocal. It's kind of reflexive, right? It's like if you imagine your subject, instead of being one person, like I saw myself in the mirror, instead of being a bunch of people doing something within all that bunch of people in a group, that is, that they fought with one another or something, or they saw one another. Those are all reciprocal meanings. So reflexive, passive, reciprocal is kind of like, to me, a subset of reflexive, but some people like to pull it out as a third possible definition of the Niphal, of what the Niphal does, the meaning of the Niphal, that it adds to these roots in Hebrew. Another one possible is like resultative. To me, this is basically reflexive as well, but you'll see a lot of grammars pull this out as like another possible nuance of meaning that really is pretty reflexive. But so it is visible, or it is edible, like an edible food. If something is possible to be eaten and be healthy for you and not make you sick, then the verb akal, which means to eat, sometimes something will be described with this verb akal, and you'll put it in the Niphal, and then it'll be a thing that which is eaten. It can be eaten. It is edible. Or a visible thing, if something can be seen. So sometimes that'll be in the Niphal. Someone's foot is sticking out. They're trying to hide, right? And their foot is sticking out. Their foot is visible. That's this resultative meaning. And like I said, just think about reflexive and passive being the two main meanings, and then these reciprocal, resultative, those are kind of nuances of the reflexive meaning. Okay, so let's see some examples of this reflexive meaning. Okay, so nimkar. So the verb makar means to sell something. Nimkar is makar in the perfect, and something is to sell something, right? So if this was just the call perfect, it would be he sold. But if it's in the Niphal, you'll see this noon put on the front here, nimkar. So it has a zip ending, so it's third masculine singular. It has this noon on the front. That's he sold himself. Now, unfortunately, this is a reality of the ancient world. That is to say that debt slavery was a very common part of the ancient world all across the ancient Near East, from Egypt all the way through to Mesopotamia. And debt slavery is something we see in the Bible all the time. We also see all the time, and not all the time, but we see quite often in the Bible as well, a rhetoric against debt slavery. So you'll see like Nehemiah 5 is a great chapter where Nehemiah gets incensed, outraged that people would, instead of helping their neighbor, that they would take their neighbor's labor for free and treat them as a slave simply because they got behind on their payments for something or another, usually for grain. That is, if you had a bad year and you ran out of seed, you have to buy next year's seed to plant it. And if you didn't have enough money, then you sold yourself. So in any event, this is an unfortunate reality of the ancient world, but nonetheless, it existed. So this nistar. So satar means to hide. So nistar, then, there's a zip ending here, would be he hid himself. So satar would be he hid, like he hid something. There'd be an object coming after it, right? But here, nistar, it's he hid himself. So some verbs, there's this like additional kind of nuance, tolerative, that you'll see some people talk about, like in commentaries and things like this. So nidrash. So darash means to seek something. Midrash, you might have heard of. That's a Jewish practice of interpretation. And that is the kind of seeking out of the truth of Scripture or the truth of oral tradition. And here, nidrash would be like he sought himself, quite literally in the Niphal, which might happen. You kind of are looking for yourself. But here, in some stories and so on, you might say, well, that doesn't quite work with my story. So maybe he let himself be sought. This is a potential. This is very rare, in fact. So don't worry. If this stresses you out, just forget about that this existed. But just to say it's possible meaning of the Niphal. Okay, the passive meaning of the Niphal. Here's some examples. So kavar would be he buried. So there's a zip ending. This is a call perfect. There's just a class of vowels, just your root. That's the call perfect. He buried. This is somebody who is burying, say, a loved one that they are bereaved by and are taking care of their body. Nikbar. So kavar is he buried. Nikbar would be he was buried. We wouldn't use the reflexive meaning here with this because he buried himself would be a pretty strange thing. I guess it's possible physically, but not something we would run across in a story in the Bible, at least. Akal, this would be he ate. This is a zip ending here. This is a call perfect 3ms, third masculine singular. Ne'ekal. Now notice we have a slightly different vowel underneath our noon. That's because that aleph is messing things up. That's a first guttural. An aleph is a guttural. Gutturals just kind of get their way with vowels. So sorry, they'll mess up our vowel patterns. But still, you see akal, and then you see a noon on front. And there's a zip ending. So this is a Niphal perfect 3ms. So instead of he ate, it would be he was eaten or devoured by an animal or something, right? Yikes. It also could be it was eaten, like a fruit or something. You can sometimes run across this what's called an impersonal construction of the passive. So amar would mean he said. That's a call perfect 3ms. A Niphal perfect 3ms of Amar would be Ne'emar, which is like it was said. But like sometimes when we say in English, they say, well, they say that this is really good over here. It was said. This is how you'd say that kind of impersonal construction in ancient Hebrew. They say this is a good place right here. Well, who do you mean? I don't know. They say. Who's they? Right? Well, here this is how we say that same vague phrase in Hebrew, Ne'emar, and it is said. And you've probably remembered sometimes in the Bible that you've run across this phrase in translation, and it is as it is said, and the name of as it is called Babel, the city, right at the end of Genesis 11, the Tower of Babel story. So there's these two subsets of meaning of the reflexive meaning, the reciprocal being one of them. We'll talk about for a moment here. So davar is to say something. So nidvaru. You have an u ending there, so it's plural, right? Zipatatati u temtenu. So here's our u ending, and we have a nun on front. So this nidbaru would be they spoke, but it's a plural, right? They spoke to themselves. Instead of imagining a group of people all speaking to only themselves, instead imagine that the group is one giant reflexive group, right? The group is your subject. So they were all speaking to each other. Hubbub. And then nilchamu. So here lacham means to fight. So lachamu would be they fought. That would be our u ending, right? Our plural ending. So our call perfect would be 3CP, or third common plural, would be lachamu. They fought. So nilchamu, that's our Niphal perfect. That would be they all fought with one another. They were all fighting together, right? Some families, that's a kind of imagine the family gathering, right? This other possible meaning of the reciprocal is the resultative. This is I'll show you what this means when it says it may indicate potential. So like ne'echal, right? It was eaten. That could mean like this fruit here. It was eaten, right? I'm sorry that your plums were in the icebox. They were so nice and so cold, right? That famous William Carlos Williams poem. So if you have it here, it could mean it was eaten, like your plum was eaten, or we could say it is eaten, and that could mean like it's something that you can eat. It's edible. Like, is it eaten? So if I put a little hay with like a composite schwa, an A-class composite schwa under there, on the front of that would be the question mark. Remember the upside down question mark? He ne'echal, is this eaten? That's something you'd actually say in ancient Israel if you ran across like a mushroom you didn't know about and asked about it. Want to make sure you weren't poisoning yourself and so on. Or this one right here, like ra'ah means to see. Ra'ah is the 3ms ending. I know it's a comet's hey at the end, but this is part of the root. Resh aleph hey is the root of the verb to see. So here we have nir'ah. So instead of he saw, it's he was, or it was seen. Or let's say it is seen. Let's say it's visible, right? It's possible to see this thing. So in any event, those are some of our potential meanings of the Niphal. And how do you know which one it is? Well, context will help you determine that. But sometimes there are some ambiguities. Sometimes you can interpret things in different ways, which is a cool thing about knowing Hebrew and being able to read the Bible. So zipatatati utemten new endings. We have our ni stuck on the front. You're looking at the Niphal perfect paradigm of strong verbs. Now, we have a couple other things we need to learn, right? So we've learned our Niphal perfects. Now let's move on to our Niphal participles. Just like our Niphal perfects, there are some things that we can just import directly from the call. What can we import directly from the call? We can import the fact that there are noun endings added to our verb. Notice there's a zip ending for the masculine singular, but for the feminine singular, we have our et ending. For our masculine plural, we have our im ending. For our feminine plural, we have our ot ending. Those are our noun and adjective endings. When you stick those onto a verb that you know, you're looking at a participle. The other thing is that we have a nun and a hirek stuck on there. So a nih. There's our nih, right? So nih plus noun endings equals a participle. Now, the one that's a little bit harder to pick out is the masculine singular, right? There is actually a difference between the masculine singular of the Niphal participle and the Niphal perfect 3ms. I'll show you that in just one moment. Here you go. So Niphal is the Niphal perfect third masculine singular, zip ending, and a ni stuck onto the verb. And Niphal is our Niphal participle masculine singular. So on the top there of the green writing, it's in white, but surrounded by the green there on the bottom half of your screen. Niphal, that's our Niphal perfect third masculine singular. And then Niphal, right, a little bit longer a, that's our Niphal participle. Now, here's the thing. This is not going to be like a make or break situation with you in recognizing these two verbs. The participle has a long a. The perfects all have the short a. I'll back up and actually show you this. Bum, bum, bum. Do you see how there's all short a's underneath the second radical, the second root letter, our tet in this word katal? Not every single one. Our third feminine singular doesn't have the A class, but almost all of them. And third, our common plural doesn't have it. But you don't have to worry about those because you don't have to distinguish those from the participle. So look at that third masculine singular, and you have a short A, and then you have a long A only in the participle forms. Again, this is not the kind of thing that you are going to lose a bunch of points on, or this is not going to be the difference between two different grades for you or something. I'm not going to focus on this for assessment, but there might be some interpretive differences that result from these two different A-class vowels in Hebrew. So there may be some kind of payoff for you exegetically by knowing this difference. So in any event, they'll be translated sometimes pretty similar. They're both masculine singular verbs. The participle is this ongoing action a lot of the time, but there's not that much difference in terms of the content of the story that would change here. So, all to say, this is our paradigm for the Niphal participle of the strong root. So, how would you use a Niphal participle? Well, many of them actually have this particular and quite interesting function. They function as adjectives. They describe things. So again, like it is eaten, it is edible, right? So nor'ah. So yara means to fear, right? So nor'ah would be like it is feared. So yara is feared, right? But nor'ah is like it is a thing that is feared. So why would you add this Niphal participle to a noun? Say like the Lord, great and feared, like nor'ah. Like that means kind of terrible, but like in this kind of awe-inspiring way. It's like when you come to the edge of a cliff and look down, and you get a little bit of vertigo, but it's kind of amazing too. That's a bit of nor'ah, right, that you're seeing right there. So navon. So vin, beit, yod, nun is a root that means like to know something, but to understand it, really, like a deep kind of understanding. Navon is like it is understood, and this can be used to describe somebody or something that is perceptive. Or ne'eman. So aman, like is amen. By the way, when you finish your prayers and you say amen, right, this is a root. It kind of means like so be it or something, right? So it means something that's there, something that exists. The root emet, the word emet, truth, comes from this. That is, truth is like a stable thing, a thing that exists in the world. It's not like a concept or an idea, right? Truth is a presence. So ne'eman here would be like it exists. It is existing. And this is a way to say firm, like a firm foundation, ne'eman. So it is strong, or it is existing. It is there. It is solid. Is one way of saying this is it is solid. So a foundation, it is solid, would mean a firm foundation. Okay, so that's basically how the Niphal participle can do different things, and you'll have to kind of figure it out in context for the different stories that you see it used in. But just to say, it can function as that in an interesting way as an adjective. Okay, so we're going to move on to the imperfect. So remember, we did call perfect. Now and we talked about Niphal perfect. We talked about the participles. You learned call participles, and now we've talked about Niphal participles. And then here we have the imperfect. Just like we learned call imperfect, we're going to learn Niphal imperfect. And this isn't too bad. That is to say, we have the same exact affirmatives and subformatives, right? We have our preformatives, our stuff added to the front, which is characteristic of the imperfect aspect, right? Imperfects have stuff added to the front of the verbs, but then they also sometimes have, to distinguish gender and number, we'll have things added to the ends of some of these forms as well. So the same exact beginnings and endings that you saw in your call imperfect, you'll see in the Niphal imperfect. The one thing you'll also see is this particular pattern in the Niphal. Now, one thing you will notice is what happened to the noon. So you see your root, katal, right? You see your particular endings. So for the third masculine plural, you see the u ending. For the feminine plurals, you see the na ending, right? You see those. Those are the same things you saw for the call imperfect. Now what you should be looking for is a noon stuck onto the front of your root, kind of in between your preformative, your prefix, and your root. But you don't see it there. Why don't you see it there? Well, you don't see it there because it got squished. It got smushed. It got pushed. Noons are weak letters, especially when you add something in front of them, before them. That pushes them into the next letter. So do you see the dagesh in every single one of the kofs on this page? That dagesh is our noon, which has curled up into a little ball and jumped into your next letter. What really happened is that it became identical to the letter kof. Lots of languages do this. The letter N, na, the sound na in many languages ends up conforming to many other letters, especially that come right after it. This is simply a common thing that happens to the sound na in many different languages, including English and Hebrew. So you can see here that you have your preformative and you have a hirek underneath it. Now the performative and the hirek underneath it, that was the sign of your call imperfect. And it will continue to be the sign of your call imperfect. You don't just see your performative and your hirek here. You see your performative, your hirek, and then you also see your dagesh in the next letter. In the first letter of the root, you'll see your dagesh. And then you'll also see underneath that every single first letter of the root in the Niphal imperfect has that long A-class vowel, the kametz, underneath it. So in the imperfect, the noon is infixed. Infixed means it's been put into the next letter. It's become a dagesh in your first letter of your root. So that hirek, do you see that on here? Hirek underneath your performative. Here's let's take this yikatel, our third masculine singular form. Notice our hirek underneath our yod, our performative. Notice our dagesh inside of our first letter of our root, and then notice your A-class vowel, your kametz, underneath that first letter of your root. That is a triangle. Notice how all of these have that triangle. I know that the aleph messes it up a bit. Gutturals do that to vowels. But notice all these other ones, they have that triangle, right? That's called the Niphal triangle, kind of like the Bermuda Triangle. Don't get lost in the Niphal triangle, right? Notice that Niphal triangle. So this, for example, yikatel, this is that triangle that you're going to see that's going to tell you that this is a Niphal. The infixed noon is your sign. Look for that Niphal triangle. Don't let it pass you by. So y'all remember imperatives? We learned those in the call, like to go, to run, to jump, and so on. This is our Niphal imperative. So if you wanted to tell someone, not shamar is our root that we're using here for our example here. If I was to make a call imperative, shamor, that would be guard or watch or keep. But if I say this in the Niphal, so my masculine singular form would be hishamer, this would have a different meaning. Instead of saying keep or guard, it would be guarded, be kept, something like that, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But in the middle of a story, you might be able to imagine some situations where someone might say, just sit there, be watched, be guarded, be kept, or something like that. This form, then, if that was what the speaker wants to say, this is the form you'd use, the Niphal imperative. Now notice, we have our triangle. Do you see the triangle? We have, strangely, a hey stuck onto the front of here. So we have a root, then we have a hey stuck on here, which there's an example, there's the explanations that you'll find, an explanation in the Kutz-Josberger book. It's probably not helpful for me to go into all the details of why, but just when you see a heh stuck onto a verb, for now, that's for you a Niphal imperative. But notice it's a hey with then a hirek underneath it and then a dagesh in your first letter of your root, and then you have the comments, that long A underneath your first letter of your root. That's that Niphal triangle, except you don't have a Ni stuck on the front, you have a Hi stuck on the front. So that's our Niphal imperative. Hishamer! So there's our triangle there. I should have highlighted the comments there, but you see that dagesh in there. The dagesh is the noon. That's your noon, which got shoved into the next letter by the addition of the Hi on the front, which is our marker of our Niphal imperatives. Notice our anomalous. That means strange. It's hard to explain. Hi prefix that is added to the Niphal imperatives. So in the imperative, the noon is infixed and assimilated. Assimilated means that it has become the next letter. When it's a dagesh, now you have two of those letters, right? So now we have two sheens. So hishamer. Notice that the imperfect and the imperative both have infixed noons. And those infixed patterns have that triangle. The hirek under your performative, the dagesh in your first letter, and the comments underneath your first letter. Look at that Niphal triangle. So here are our Niphal infinitives. There's two forms of our Niphal infinitive absolute. It's strange that there's two forms of it. Again, anomalous, we might say. But on the right there, that looks a lot like your Niphal imperative. Hikatol is our infinitive absolute on the right. On the left, we have niktol, which maybe would sound a bit like niktol from our call imperfect 1CP, our first common plural form, like we will kill or something, if that's what you're trying to say. But it can also be, it is indistinguishable from the Niphal infinitive absolute. So why are there these two forms? Because they probably evolved differently, maybe even in different forms of Hebrew, different areas, different dialects over time. But we have these two different forms. The noon may be prefixed or infixed. The one that I've seen more often is on the right, the He beginning. I've seen that that might be my anecdotal evidence. I don't actually know how many of these occur in the text. Kutz and Josberger maybe even tell you. I may have forgotten that part of the chapter. But in any event, either of these are possible. These are infrequent. You won't see these that much in translation. But remember, you can look up your root, and the BDB will parse it for you much of the time. It'll tell you what form it is. So you can look and see if your verse that you're trying to look up is listed as a Niphal form, and it'll say Niphal infinitive absolute or whatever. So in any event, use your parsing friends here. There is the infinitive construct. So I'll back up for a second. Remember, infinitive absolute, there's also infinitive construct. These will often have object suffixes added to the end of them. So we'll have suffixes that tell us pronouns. You can also have things added to the front of this sometimes, like prepositions, like lamed or bait, and so on. But so hikatel here's our infinitive. So this would be to be killed, which is not a very happy thing to have, but the Bible does describe this sometimes. So the infinitive construct here is generally identical to the imperative. And in the infinitive construct, the noon is infixed. So again, let me say this again here. Our imperative, right? Our infinitive and our imperfect are all infixed. They all have the triangle. I know our infinitive absolute has that strange form that's just niktol, but bear with me. So here are the different ways you can tell these things apart just by looking at them. Again, our infinitives have a slightly strange form that just has a noon on the front, but don't worry about that for now. This is what I would try to take to heart, right? These are the markers that you hang your hat on when you see them in the text. So there's two different ways that the noon is attached to the Niphal. There are prefixed forms and there are infixed forms. The prefixed are the perfect and the participle, where you'll see the noon. Otherwise, you won't see the noon because there are other things added to the front, other suffixes that are added that reduce the noon to the little dagesh. And then you'll have the triangle, the hirek, dagesh, comments. See that Niphal triangle, that beautiful Niphal triangle that shows you that the Niphal is there, even if you can't see it. So we have our prefixed perfect and participle and our infixed imperfect imperative and infinitive. I love how that breaks down. So we have a few examples here, just to help you walk through some of the Niphal and see some of these things in the wild or in action. Of course, you'll see more in your Learning Biblical Hebrew workbook in the chapter on Joseph. They'll try to work in some Niphals from now on. But so here you see Nimtzeu Devarecha. So matzah means to find. So Nimtzeu, you have an u ending. So it's, see that u ending? And you have a noon on the front, a nit on the front. That means it's a perfect third masculine plural. So matzah means to find. Nimtzeu is they were found. And then devarecha, a devar is a word. Devarim is plural words. Devarim that has a suffix added to it. You take away the mem. You add your suffix, and now you have devarecha, words of you. So they were found, words of you, or your words. Your words were found. Or here's another example. U shemo lo yizacher od. So u shemo. So Shem is name, shemo is his name. So u shemo and his name. Lo yizacher. Lo means not, and yizaker. So zakar is our root there of our verb. Zakar means to remember. Remember, it's that word that's hard to remember. And we have the yod added to the front of it, and note we have a zip ending. So that means we have an imperfect, because we have a prefix. It's a yod prefix, so it's a third person. It's a zip ending, which means it's third masculine singular. And we might think that this is a call. So it's he will remember. But it's not a call, because you do have that hirek underneath your performative, but then you also have a dagesh in the middle of your first radical, and then you also have a comments underneath it, which means you have the Niphal triangle. Dun, dun, dun. So instead of he will remember, it means it will be remembered, or remember, lo means not, so it will not be remembered. So, and his name, it will not be remembered, od, which means anymore. So that his name will no longer be remembered. Here's another example. Begivon nir'ah Yahweh el Shlomo. I don't know if you know Shlomo, but this is you might have a Jewish friend named Shlomo and so on, or have heard of someone named Shlomo. But this is the Jewish name for the Hebrew name for Solomon. This is Solomon in Hebrew, Shlomo, which is also a contemporary Jewish name that's in use. So we have a ba on the front here of this phrase. I'm just looking at the first word there, ba. So in, and then Givon. So Gibeon, it's a place in Israel. So Begivon. Nir'ah. This is our root ra'ah, which means to see. Nir'ah has a zip ending. I know it's a kamateh, but it's a zip ending because the kamateh is part of the root. The root is resh aleph hey, to see. So nir'ah is maybe he was seen. We have a noon on the front, so it could be either a perfect or a participle. Now notice, we have a zip ending, so it's maybe 3ms or something like that, so he was seen. But notice we have that long A underneath our second radical. So is that a sign that maybe this is a Niphal participle? Let's see. So in Gibeon, it was seen, Yahweh, to Shlomo or Solomon. So Yahweh was seen to Solomon. Maybe Yahweh was visible to Solomon. One way we translate this in English is Yahweh appeared. But notice it's pretty cool in Hebrew because we don't say that in English. We don't say someone was seen by someone else. At least we can. There are times you can say that. But if you're saying like Yahweh showed up somewhere. So here we say Yahweh was visible to Solomon. So in English, we translate this as the Lord appeared to Solomon. We make it into an active verb, but really it's kind of cool in the Hebrew that it's a passive verb. And now you know that. This is often how it's said that God appears. It's this passive thing. So it's not like God either shows up or doesn't show up. It's like God's always there, but sometimes we just see, or sometimes we don't happen to. God doesn't happen to be visible to us. It's a pretty neat little thing there. Okay, so here's another example here. Me ha yardain yikaretun. Now remember that I'm going to talk about that last word there, yikaretun. Remember sometimes they add to make it sound old. They add noons to the end of verbs. Just take that noon off in your mind. And then you're left with yikaretu. So may, the waters. This is a little bit tricky. It looks a little bit like me, like who, me, who. But this is may. So mayim is water. It's like a dual thing, right? Mayim, for some reason, water is always in the dual. It's kind of neat, actually. They thought there were waters above. That's this blue sky, and the waters below. So the waters. But in any event, the waters, so may with a maim and then a tsere and then a yod, that means waters of. Waters of Hayardain, which is Jordan. The waters of the Jordan. Yikaretu. Karat means to cut. A yod on the front and an u at the end, a shurik at the end. That means third plural, third common plural. And you might say they, like all of them cut or something like that. All of them will cut. But here, notice that this is not the call. This is the Niphal. You have the hirek under your performative, and then you have a dagesh, and then you have a kametz underneath. That's our triangle. Dun, 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 the Niphal triangle. And that means the waters of the Jordan will be cut off. And this is the directions that Joshua is receiving from God and then is giving to the people when they are crossing over the Jordan River. The waters of the Jordan will be cut off when the priests step into the water carrying the Ark of the Covenant. So vayar v'hinei ayil achar ne'echaz basavach. So vayar, this is ra'ah. You lost your third hey, I'm sorry. But this is just a call. I know it doesn't have a hirek under your performative. It should, but this is a strange form. Here's a weak form. So vayar, and he looked. That's our vayik tol, remember, our storytelling mode. And he looked. Vahine, and behold, ayil, a ram, ahar, after or behind, probably here behind, a ram behind, ne'echaz, basavach. There's a couple of vocab words that you probably don't know here, but achaz means to seize or grab. So a ram, it was seized or it was caught. It was grabbed. And then basavach, the savach is a thicket or a thorn bush, and ba means in. It was grabbed within the thorn bush. So who's the agent here? Obviously, God is the one. So sometimes you'll see the passive voice. The Niphal is used to describe things that God has done sometimes, the miraculous. But it takes a step back from making God the active agent. Behold, there was this ram that happened to be caught in the thicket. And this is Genesis 22, obviously the sacrifice of Isaac, where the ram is given in the place of Isaac. Ela, here's another example here. Ela toledot ha-shamayim v'ha-aretz behibar am. So Ela is the plural demonstrative. These, toledot, this is generations. Yalad means like a son or a child. And Yalad can also be the verb to bear. So Yeled is a child. Yalad is the verb to bear or to beget, for a woman to give birth. Toledot means generations. Notice our ot ending, plurals, and then our tav on the front to make it a verb. So here's our generations. So these are the generations. And then hashamayim, of the heavens, haaretz, and the earth. Behibar am. Now, there's a little secret here. That is the maim at the end. Just forget that. That's an object suffix, which we haven't learned how to add to things yet, that are verbs. But notice we have a bait stuck onto the front. And then we have bara. We've got hey then, and then bara. Bara, the verb is to create, right? Bereshit bara Elohim. So your root there is bara, to create. And then we have a hib stuck on the front of hi. Notice our hey, our hirek underneath it, and then our dagesh in our bait, our first letter of our root bara. And then we have a long a vowel underneath our bait. That's our Niphal triangle. And we have a hey with a Niphal triangle. And then we have a bait stuck onto the front of that, a preposition. Well, you stick these prepositions onto infinitives. So to create, to be created, in their being created. It's pretty cool. So me give you a couple more examples here. So, Vayomer la malach Yahweh harba arbe et zarech velo yisafer merov. So, Vayomer, and he said, la, to her. Notice your mapik, your dot, and your hey. You're not supposed to put a dagesh in a hey, right? That's to tell you it's her. Don't forget her. So, and he said to her, and then malach Yahweh, the angel of Yahweh, the messenger of Yahweh, the angel of Yahweh. There's no word that means just angel in Hebrew. It means messenger. And it means used for human messengers and for divine messengers, right? So, and he said to her, the messenger of Yahweh, or the angel of Yahweh, harba arbe, which is to make great, I will make great. Don't worry about the exact forms of those right now. Those come from Rove. But just forget about those particular forms for now, but just focus on what comes next here. Et zarech, object, seed of you, your seed. So I'll greatly multiply. I'll make really, really big your seed. That is your progeny, your children. Velo, and not yisaper or yisafer merov. And it will not be counted. Remember, safar can mean like to count or recount. Here, the yod on the front is our performative, so we're in the Niphal imperfect. You know it's Niphal because it's got the Niphal triangle, then a hirek underneath your performative, a dagesh in your samek, your first letter of your root, and then a long A underneath it. So they cannot be counted. And then merov, like from being great. Like they're so great. They're so great they can't even ever be counted. So you might think that this is like Abram and Sarah being spoken to right here, but you might be surprised. Take a look at Genesis 16. Really an amazing chapter. And a heartbreaking one too. So, va'ani lo nikreti lavo el hamelech. So, va'ani, and me, or as for me, lo nikreti. So, kara means to call out, or cry out, or assemble, even sometimes kind of to draw people together. It can even mean to read out loud sometimes. So nikreti, you have a noon on the front with a hirek underneath it as a prefix. So you're looking at a Niphal. Remember, that can also be your call imperfect first common plural ending, but then you have this T ending. That's a perfect first common singular ending. So you can't have the noon on the front of that and make it an imperfect, right? So this is a perfect. This is a Niphal perfect of kara, first person common singular. So I have been called. So something like, and as for me, I have not, remember there's a lo before your verb, so I have not been called, lavo, to go, el hamelech, to the king. This is Esther saying, there's a death sentence for people who show up unbidden to the king. And I have not been called to the king, so I can't go try to save my people right now. This is when she's talking to Mordecai. Of course, she does go save her people because she's brave, but at that point in the story, she's a little worried about it. So, va'amarta elav hishamer al tira. And you said, our ta ending, right, our second person masculine singular perfect ending. We have lots of A-class vowels and nothing added to the front, so other than a conjunction, there's a vav there. But this would mean like, and you said, elav, to me, hishamer, kind of like, watch yourself. Shamar is like to guard, right? And then the hey here, we don't know what that is yet, but the hey with a hirek underneath, and then with a dagesh in our next letter, which is our first letter of our root shamar that we know. And then we have a long A-class vowel underneath that first letter of the root. There's our Niphal triangle. We got a hey stuck onto our Niphal triangle. And we're hearing direct speech, like, and you said to me, or to him, I'm sorry, no, it's not him, me. So that's a vav there, a third person masculine singular. So, and you said to him, Hishamer, al tira. So Hishamer is kind of like, watch yourself. And then al tira, this is al not lo. So remember when you say lo and then you have a second person imperfect verb, it's like never, never, never do that. 10 Commandments, don't ever do that. Like, don't you ever murder people. Here we have al instead, which means like don't now. You don't need to do this now. So right now, al tira, you don't need to be afraid. You don't need to be scared. And you shall say to him, Hishamer, watch yourself. It means take heed, like be careful is kind of what this means in Hebrew. Hishamer, this Niphal imperative of the verb shamar. Watch out, take heed, be careful. Al tira, don't fear, don't worry. This is the beginning of the prophecy of the Emmanuel in Isaiah 7. A couple more examples here. Im tashuv ad Shaddai tibana. Im means if. Tashuv, here we have like you will return. If you will return, ad Shaddai. Until Shaddai, until God, Tibna. You will be built up, the verb bana, to build. Here, this is a tav stuck onto the front, so we've got our preformative. We have an imperfect. You might be tempted to say call imperfect because it's our imperfect beginnings, and the yod a hirek underneath, and then we have a root that we know. But check this out. We have the hirek underneath our performative, our tav, our second person performative. Then we have a dagesh in the first letter of our radical of our root bana, and then we have an A-class vowel underneath it, a long A-class vowel. So we have hirek, dagesh, kametz. That's our Niphal triangle. Dun dun dun. Instead of you will build up, it's you will be built up. If you return to Shaddai. Shaddai meaning like the Almighty One. You will be built up. In this example, Anachnu na'aleh v'nilchamnu kachol asher tzivanu Yahweh. So Anachnu, that's our first person common plural independent pronoun. Anachnu meaning us or we. Na'aleh, from our verb Allah, to go up. Here the noon is probably our first person common plural prefix for the call imperfect. So this is, and we ourselves will go up. And we will go up. V'nilchamnu. So here you have a new ending. You have a vav at the front, which means and, right? And then we have a new ending. That new ending, it's like, zipatata tiu temten nu. That's a perfect, right? Here this is probably vakatal is what we call this. This is like vav consecutive future, right? This is future storytelling. So we will go up and we will do what? It's said in the perfect, but it's this chain of verbs thing that you find in Hebrew. And that noon on the front there, if that's not perfect, this is a perfect verb. So if you have a noon stuck onto a perfect verb at the beginning, then you're looking at a Niphal perfect. Because a noon stuck onto the verb before it, that was because you were in the imperfect. So we have perfect ending and a noon stuck on, which means we got to be looking at a Niphal perfect. And then we have our root, lacham, which means to fight. We will go up and we will fight. Kachol, with all, asher, which tzivanu, tzava means to command, which we have commanded. No, which Yahweh has commanded us. Notice, Yahweh has commanded. Tzivah kind of looks a little bit like it's a call. A Niphal there with that pattern. But don't worry about tzavah for now. It's a weak root. But just the example here, take a look at lacham. Notice nilcham nu. We will fight because it's a vav consecutive perfect. So vayiktol, remember, it's like the vav conversive or the vav consecutive. It's like looks like an imperfect, but it's storytelling mode, past tense. This is the opposite of the storytelling mode here. Okay, I know it's a little bit tricky. Sorry. Tanu li ish vanil chama yachad. So tanu, this is a verb you've learned this verb, but you haven't learned this form yet. This is natan, a weak verb, but natan, like Nathan, means to give. So tanu is the imperative form. We lose our noon at the front. So give, and then li, to me. So give to me, ish, a man. V'nil chama yachad. So and then do you see your Niphal triangle there? Nil chama. So lacham is that same root to fight that we saw in the last one. But imagine if we've got this, we have the Niphal triangle, and then we also have a noon added to it. This is our imperfect. So give to me a man, and we will fight yachad together. If you want to get specific here, we've got an imperative, and then a vav, and then an imperfect. If you remember our chains of verbs that we studied when we talked about volitionals, this is our chain which says consequence. So give to me a person so that we may fight yachad. Fight together. All right, those are some examples. We got it kind of increasingly harder in the examples. I know that there were some things we haven't learned yet, even in those examples. Some weak roots thrown in there, but hopefully it wasn't too much of a curveball. If you want to see more examples of the Niphal, be sure to take a close look at the Joseph story for this week.